Yeah, thanks for joining us, Mads, on this exciting talk about how our customers and marketing teams and content creators can get a better understanding for privacy and how it affects their work. So yeah, tell us a little bit about your background.
So yeah, my name is Mads. I'm running a legal consultancy firm, primarily helping within GDPR, AI, stuff like that. Also, it has been a great focus of mine to help marketing teams with the regulation, especially about GDPR and how to use content.
And I think from our angle, it's, to some it would be obvious that photos and videos that contains people is considered, personal information, but it can be a surprise to some because that obviously means you need to know where your footage is and how it should be treated and how to handle when GDPR stuff appears. So that's of course some of the stuff we will be talking about today. And so tell us a little bit about like how should we view these sorts of photos and images? When is it personal data?
So as a main rule, you should always remember that when somebody is identifiable directly or also indirectly, on photo or video material, we are, as a main rule, talking about personal data, meaning that when you, as a professional with a commercial side, are handling these data, the video or the photo material, then it will be personal data covered by the GDPR, meaning the whole material framework of the GDPR is applying to you as a company. Yeah.
And so the company itself is actually the data controller that has the responsibility that the things are handled well, and then it's the marketing team that then is from a more operational side responsible to make sure that everything is handled responsibly and in order and so forth. And I think that's some of the things that we see, at least with some of our customers, is that, when GDPR stuff arises and there's someone who has questions, where am I in the footage, we need to delete something, actually even knowing where these assets are and how they're used can be quite a bit of a challenge if you don't be a bit more proactive about it and start to put things in the system. Of course, one of the things that people always talk about is this consent versus a contract and this legitimate interest and so forth. Tell us a little bit about how privacy comes into play, and there's different ways of getting permission from people.
So when we are inside the scope, in scope of the GDPR, then you will have certain rules which always must be applied. So, for example, you will have to have a legal basis for that processing activity that you are going to do. So, one legal basis could be consent, as you're talking about here. Another could be the legitimate interest rule, but you can also rely on other frameworks, contract law, for example, with the model contract that you are referring to here. So what is important is that there are pros and cons in all three types of legal basis, and it's very important to determine which one is the best choice in the specific situation, because that might differ depending on the situation that you use.
And obviously the goal of this conversation is to give our audience a bit better understanding of the three, because you should always, of course, involve the actual legal team, your lawyers, whoever you have at your disposal to determine what is the right fit for us, what kind of risks are we facing here, how should we do this in a pragmatic approach. We at least see sometimes that you say, oh, we just need consent, as if consent is the only one that's available to you. And what we see with our customers is that sometimes, once they realize that, consent, you can opt out and people can say no later on, that can pose a lot of problems for the marketing team, that now the critical material that they use is now rendered unusable. So maybe tell us a little bit about how to kind of look at those three from what are the advantages and disadvantages of those?
Yes, because that is like the main point in this that if you're using consent, that's very straightforward. Even though there are some specific requirements that you will have to live up to when talking about consent, both from a privacy perspective, but also from a marketing perspective, because the two areas of law, marketing law and privacy law, are overlapping. They're quite intertwined actually when we're talking about the consent form.
So GDPR is sort of like a base that's underneath that you need to have, and then
exactly.
on top of that you have the marketing aspect of it. How are you allowed to use people and their name and so forth?
Exactly, and you have the consumer ombudsman who have put some guidance out.
And of course, again, the context in which this is used all depends on the customers. You know, how they use the material. You know, what's the risk profile and so forth. So, without proper conversation with your legal team, it will be impossible to determine exactly what is a good pragmatic fit.
It might be.
And how does that happen in the real world? I mean, you've been in these situations in a big Danish law firm. Like, how do those conversations typically happen?
Just like you put it in the beginning, that most people or companies think that the consent legal basis is the way going forward.
It's easy. We just have to get people to sign.
We'll just have this consent form, and often the consent form will be very simple, drafted, and that's like the first issue. That often it's not that simple actually when it comes to it, because when you are to come back to the question, when you're using consent, that's like your framework for what you can do with the personal data that you're collecting, the photo material or the video material. So if it's not in the consent that the data subject, the people in the footage, has signed to, then you cannot use it for anything else. So it's very purpose specific when you use the consent format.
And you have to get it every time you film. That's also one thing we see with our customers. Like, oh, but they signed, last time we filmed. And oh no, well, you need to ask them again.
You need to ask them again, unless it's very specific that it's this date and this date and this date, where we do different footages, photo shoots. Then you will have to exactly make a new consent form. So there might be some hedges on this one with the consent. Yeah.
And for consent, what are some of the typical basics of that? I mean, it has to be written, you can't do it passively. You can't just say, oh, you accept. You saw the camera, therefore you accept. Yeah. What are tell us a little bit about the basics of a consent form.
So there are 4 requirements that you will always have to fulfill when we're talking about consent. So first of all, it will have to be freely given. You cannot just assume that people that are concerned has given consent to your photo shoot at the consent. So it has to be freely given. Okay. That's the first one. Then it has to be informed the specific 2 requirements which are very close to each other, but it's like the depth of making the data subject, the people in the photo material or video material, understand what is it we're going to do with the data.
So not complex terms and conditions that no human can actually read. That's also how, it has to be user-friendly, and it's something that...
Plain language.
Plain language, is a good term for it.
That's very important. And I would actually say that, of course, it has to be freely given, but the informed and specific requirements, because it's actually 2 requirements, just close to each other, that's the most tricky part when talking about consent, because you can very easily make it too broad, too deep, and then actually the whole consent will fall apart.
Yeah, because it needs to be specific.
It needs to be specific, exactly.
You can't just say, oh, we want to use this for X, Y, Z in all worlds and all universes, blah, blah. No. It has to be on point.
So that's actually art to draft a good consent, which will fly if you ask the Danish DPA.
And that's where the whole point of this conversation is also for the marketing team to understand that when they reach out to their lawyers or whoever's helping them, advisors for their specific project, is that they need to know, how will we use this? It has to be specific. We have to dial it in a bit and figure out exactly what it is we want to do with this material.
Excellent point, because that's actually one of the main issues that I'm meeting with my customers, is that we actually don't know what we want to do with it. We will figure out along the way. Yeah. But that's actually not good enough when we're talking about consent, because you will have to know this before you're actually doing the photo shoot, or whatever it is that you're doing and are allowed to do based on your consent. So it's very, very important that you internally have talked about what is it actually we want to do with this data. Yeah. That's very important.
Yeah, and I would say some of the things that we always kind of account a little bit is the fact that I say to our clients, at least, anything that the marketing team does is typically considered, a commercial purpose. So privacy rules do matter. That is, it seems unlikely that it will not fall under that umbrella.
Yeah. And again, here we are talking about several different types of rules. We have both the privacy rules, but we also have the marketing rules. And we're speaking about the marketing rules. The Danish Consumer Ombudsman is very clear about that. You doesn't need much to state that it's a commercial purpose. The bar is very low here. Yeah. And when we have a commercial purpose, we are inside the framework of the GDPR. So that's like...
There's no way around it.
There's no way around it.
Even though we would like to just... and of course, it's about finding a pragmatic approach with your legal team and say, okay, how do we stay productive and create a lot of content without actually, breaking any rules and being pragmatic about it. And so, that's why they invite people like you in to come and say, okay, we have this purpose. We want to try to do this. How do we do it? Because that is the conversation that you need to have before you start figuring out, is it consent? Is it model contracts? How are we going to do it? So, of course, having that conversation with your legal team and figuring out what's the right approach, what should we pick? I mean, we've talked about consent here, but of course, there's also something like a model contract that can help us out and give us more certainty.
Yeah. So the model contract is very interesting. When you have like the normal legal basis under the GDPR, consent, legitimate interest, which is a fluffy thing in this regard because it may be difficult to apply. Again, something that you should seek specific advice on when choosing which legal basis that is the right one. But the model contract is very interesting because we are here moving away a bit from privacy law. Only privacy law, because the privacy law will still apply underneath, and looking a bit more into contract law, where you have the something for something principle.
So a payment needs to be made.
A payment in market conditions need to be made.
Yeah.
But what is market conditions? That may differ.
We get that question all the time. It's when is it a contract? And I say, consider what you ask people. Are they just an extra in the background that are there for a little bit? Or, are you going to use this for a massive project where you're putting in a lot of money in distribution? Then maybe...
Is it a professional model or is it someone who is just at a concert? Something like that.
It is difficult to determine. But I would say... Obviously, investing a lot of money in content where you hire a crew and you go out and film and it's important material you're trying to do, then relying on consent is not very smart because, it's not a solid foundation to be in. So paying people, making sure you have a model contract might be a good option. It all depends on the situation. What else is there to consider for a model contract? So we know there's a payment and then the terms are set. Otherwise, what are the other typical sorts of things we should see in there?
So the things that you should be aware of when working with the model contract is that compared to the consent framework, where you have to be, where the consent has to be informed and specific, you will have to do the same, but that's in the contract. So you will still have a legal basis under the GDPR, but that's another one we haven't talked about before. It would probably be that you're fulfilling a contract. So the thing with that legal basis is that you can't withdraw it as you can with the consent. Because that should always be able for the data subject to withdraw that consent. So when we're working with the contracts instead, then that contract may only be revoked if it's inside the contract framework. So you have a more freely access to agree between the parties what should be in the contract than what you are able to do when you are relying on the consent.
And of course, having both in your arsenal when you're trying to go out and do marketing activities and saying, okay, we can rely on both, understanding the difference between the two and then picking the right tool for the job is the essential part.
That's a very interesting talk to have with your internal legal team or whoever you can talk about.
That knows the specifics.
That knows the
because
specifics.
That is the key.
Because sometimes it will be very interesting to rely on the consent. If it's a shorter format, the economics around it is lower than a long contract or something like that. Then.
And so if a company were to reach out to an expert like you and get advice from you, what should the marketing team bring in order to have a good conversation with you on dialing this sort of stuff in?
Yeah.
What would be your first questions?
What are you going to use it for? Yeah. So what is your plan with this?
The purpose.
Yeah, the purpose.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and that's actually a funny thing, because everything that we're talking about in regards of privacy, that like centers around the purpose. What is the purpose with this?
Yeah.
So that's a good
and of
question.
course it's commercial. You know, we discussed that, but also where it will be distributed, to what extent, and how the material might be.
What's the time frame?
Yeah.
Are you planning on using this material, this video, or this photo for like the next 10 years?
Yeah.
Then you should probably think about using a model contract.
Yeah.
Are you going to use it for one Instagram post or on TikTok or whatever platform that you're choosing, LinkedIn? I don't know.
Yeah. How valuable is the asset? And I think the production value, you know, how much effort are you putting into the campaign also could probably help you kind of dial in. You know, basing that on a simple consent might not be a smart investment. Might be a little bit too risky.
Yeah.
And I think that's some of the things we're seeing as well, is that starting to evaluate before we go filming, kind of like, what's the longevity of this material, how critical is it for us, and how long time do we want to recycle it, and so forth is of course key. When we have all this great photo and video material laying around, what are some of the typical issues that they could face?
So yeah, I really, this is a huge box of of issues that might occur, but some of the things that I have seen is that it might be difficult to apply with some of the rules. Example, the rule of informing. When we are talking about processing personal data, you will have to inform the data subjects, the persons, the people on the material. What are you going to do with it? For how long will you store the data?
Yeah.
But the information obligation is something that might be difficult for someone to apply with. And
so in those respects, actually clearly communicating, okay, what is it used for? How long are we going to keep the data? How can you exercise your rights? In other words, how can you get in contact with us? How can I complain? And so what are the typical kind of GDPR requests that a marketing team might face? I mean, we've obviously seen it with our customers where something like, I want to delete my data, or what data do you have on me? It's like, what does the real world look like in terms of GDPR? What do we need to be able to do, so to speak? What's our responsibility as a marketing team?
Yeah, because and as a company, because it will often fall back on the legal department if you have one, or somebody actually apart from the marketing team, because the marketing team is very good at doing marketing, but not necessarily very good at handling legal complaints or requests. So, but the most typical thing that you should be able to handle is requests for access.
Okay.
And that might actually be difficult in some of these situations, because if you're filming at a concert or something like that, and someone knows that he or she is on the photo material and actually want access to see, I don't know what it could be. Was I drunk at that concert? Yeah. Do I really want that content to be on the internet? Then you should be able to find that piece.
So you need that paper trail of saying, okay, what did we have? Who's in our footage? All those things.
Again, it depends on the specific situation, but you might end up in a situation where you will need to figure out.
Well, we've seen some of those things play out where, you know, after the fact, people, I wish we had, you know, a better system. All of our footage somehow organized in a way where we do have a paper trail. Because what we've seen, at least in the past, right, is that you have a big pile of papers that's full of signatures of people who gave their consent, everything's fine. But now you got to do this detective work of figuring out who's who and how do we actually know for a fact who these people are and what they have signed. That can be quite tricky.
That can be quite tricky.
What else is there for kind of, so you have the right to be deleted, I guess, saying stop using my stuff, you're not allowed anymore, I can withdraw my consent.
The right to be forgotten, but that's a rule, a right, which is a bit misinterpreted, because if you're for example are withdrawing your consent, then automatically you will have as a data controller to delete that footage.
Of course.
And then this right will automatically apply to your personal data, which the company is processing.
Yeah, okay.
So that might also be a tricky one, and it's not necessarily in every situation that you actually have the right to get that deletion.
Okay.
So again, it's a right where before you just delete anything, it might be a good idea to seek some advice from a privacy professional. But
of course, and without the actual context and the specifics around these things, like there's no one size fits all. It has to, you have to know the details, and and that's also again the purpose of this conversation, is to give the marketing teams a better understanding of this landscape, so they can, when they face challenges like this, understand it a little bit better. So when they are asking their legal team or an advisor like you, to have an intelligent conversation around this, like how do we mitigate these risks, and how do we handle it? How do we set up processes so we can do these things more effectively? Because of course we still want to create a lot of marketing, we still want to have promotion material with people, and obviously handling that in a responsible way is the way to do it, without drowning in paperwork. In order to avoid all of this, it sounds so complex, or the paper trail and privacy and so forth. Like, what are the considerations and things that you would recommend them to do before they go and talk to their lawyers or an external advisor like you? What kind of homework do we need to do as a marketing team?
Yeah, before you're talking to external or internal advisors, depending on your setup, I think, as we talked a little about already, it's very good to be clear about what is it that you want to do.
The purpose.
Purpose. Yeah. What is your purpose?
But extent of the material, is it just internal stuff? Because it does matter. I mean, right?
It matters. Yeah. Which kind of technology are you planning to use when you're doing your marketing, and all that architectural.
So a bit of a workflow. Who does what? Who's involved with the process?
Data flows from A to B and then to C. Who's involved? Do we have external freelancers? Which parties do we have? Yeah, that's a good place to start. And that said, I think that what most actually are challenged about is that they doesn't have the internal governance in place.
Okay.
So when you succeed in having good internal governance, I think that's a huge help for the marketing department.
Okay. They know the rules of engagement.
They know the rules of engagement. They know it's like the classical who's responsible, who's accountable. Should anybody be informed before or after, and all that kind of stuff. It might also be a great help for the marketing department if they have some pre-drafted templates and some instructions in. When is it a good idea to use consent? When is it a good idea to use the contract models? Are we sure that the privacy policy we have is updated with the purposes that we actually want to do, and stuff like that? So.
And how much of this landscape changes all the time? Because at least that's what I see, is that it doesn't have to be, an ongoing conversation every, 2 weeks. It's more about a good foundation that we know that we can operate on top of. Or how does the real world work there, so to speak, in a pragmatic way?
In the perfect world, it is exactly as you explained there. If you have like a good foundation, then you can easily adjust on top. Okay. Of course, when the purpose is changing and you are collecting some new types of data, new categories of data subject or something like that, you will change a little bit, but that's the smaller parts. If the foundation is good and before we're going on a photo shoot, we have to ensure that we are in control over this and this and that.
Yeah.
That
And
will
that
be a
rarely
huge
changes.
help.
It's the same
That will
approach,
be the
whether it's
same every
project
time.
A or project B, doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
It's just about knowing.
It's almost a checkbox exercise, and then with small fine adjustments along the way, that will.
So no need to reinvent the wheel every time. It's you have a structure, and as long as you follow that, you'll be fine. Any other advice for the marketing teams out there? I mean, obviously, doing your homework before you go out and produce a lot of content is a good idea. What else would you kind of recommend?
Yeah, because that was actually what I was going to do. That's the best thing that you can do. Do your homework, at least part of it, before you go out there in the field. Because if you have getting your advice on what are the boundaries for this, before you go on your photo shoot or what it is that you're going to do, that will be a huge help for you along the way with the compliance work that you'll have to do.
So a lot of this stuff can sound kind of complex, and there might be a tendency to just say, okay, we're gonna do status quo, we'll just continue and not worry about it, and then if stuff happens, we'll deal with it. And that might not be the right approach.
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. I think that often, getting started is halfway to the goal. And when you actually go ahead with this compliance work, it's not as bad as it may sound. And just to realize that when we have getting a bit of advice before going on a photo shoot or something like that, so we are aware what are the boundaries for this, that will be a huge help for you internally in terms of ensuring that you actually are compliant or close to.
So it sounds like it's not necessarily that big of an exercise. As a matter of fact, figuring out how to navigate this and find the right fit for your situation is a lot easier, because then you will go out and collect the correct purpose and figure out what you need to do in way easier than trying to fix wrong behavior for a really long time. So I guess that's sort of the main advice, is saying that, tackle this up front. It'll be a lot easier than trying to do it retrospectively.
Tackle it up front and be clear internally on when is it a good idea to do A and when is it a good idea to do B. I think that's a great start for most. Yeah.
Well, thanks for having this talk, Mads. I think hopefully our audience will understand a little bit better what aspects to consider before reaching out for advice on this topic. And then, of course, being a bit more proactive about it, I think is also, it's easy to fix before you get into trouble. So thanks for helping us on that journey.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's been interesting.